2,500 years ago, in the prosperous kingdom of Shakya, lived Siddhartha, the crown prince. He had countless noble qualities, and therefore the royal family saw him as a future ruler and put upon him their big hopes. But the young prince didn't wish to take the throne, or luxury, or happy family life. Wrestling with the eternal questions of life, Siddhartha left the palace to find a cure for old age, sickness, and death. We now continue our journey to the sacred sites of India and Nepal, following the journey of Prince Siddhartha to where he was destined to triumph over the forces of evil, realize his true essence, and receive a new name. The Buddha. The purpose of our trip is not to see beautiful places and get to know the unusual culture of other countries. By visiting a Buddhist shrine, where there is the energy of the Buddha Shakyamuni, and learning about his unique path, we try only to understand what we can learn from the story of Buddha's life. All the way up to Siddhartha's enlightenment, the gods many times played an important role in his search for the truth and helped him to overcome difficulties. Invisibly accompanying him, like protectors of the knowledge, they created the conditions for Siddhartha to remember who he really was. A common concept goes something like this. The protectors are portrayed as traditional Tibetan images of wrathful deities who have scary faces, teeth and hands. They are called protectors, and everyone believed that they actually looked like that. This is the Tibetan view of reality. But where does the idea of the Tibetan protector actually come from? The explanation is the following. When Padmasambhava came to Tibet, Tibet was chosen by the yogis of the past to preserve the teachings of the future, Tibetans had a different religion, the Bon religion, where they practiced bloody sacrifice and very unpleasant things that I do not even want to talk about. Very trustworthy sources confirm this. The deities of Tibet were not allowed to bring Buddhism to Tibet at first. Atisha came, as well as other yogis, attempting to bring Buddhism, but they did not succeed. But Padmasambhava made it happen, and he managed to make an agreement to cooperate with those angry deities. He explained to them that it was more profitable for them to cooperate and not to fight with Buddhism. Without defenders, it's impossible to be in this world and impossible to be at all. One type of person focuses on their own desires, and then there are some people who say that the pursuit of your own desires destroys you, that to follow your own desires is egoism. Those who are consumed by their desires will make huge problems for those who try to point out this egoistic way of living. Therefore, there is a theory that protectors reincarnate almost together with practitioners, yogis, in order to help them on a subtle level literally to survive in this world. Without this protection, it is almost impossible to resist the pressure from the egoist side. This protection comes from a subtle level. because the physical level would be too obvious or visible. It turns out such an illusion is created for society. People whose ideas about life are different are often called sects, for example. Please note that all movements in the beginning were small sects, in opposition to larger and older movements. The same happened, for example, to Christianity, which was oppressed in every way, and then look what happened. Society always reacts against revolutionary ideas at first. Of course, there is an honor, a dignity, which appears around the Buddha, because the Buddha advocated justice, and it is the prerogative of the gods to watch out for justice. Why is Indra the god of capability? Because his responsibility is to support balance, which means there has to be a certain harmony. Disharmony creates egoism. Everybody has their own interests, and they believe that their interests are most important. When this is the case, they can force others to satisfy their selfish needs. And that's the problem. In the Lotus Sutra, Buddha was called the father of all living beings. If we compare this description with the descriptions of the gods in Vedic culture, then we will see the same. The gods in the Vedas are caring parents who are always helping their children to reach a new level of spiritual development. And there is a family-like, respectful attitude towards the superior powers. There is a huge amount of trust, which can help a human to feel in contact with the gods and feel their presence in his or her life. Every religious and ideological school uses its own graphic style that tries to portray these divine creatures. When artists face the task of conveying the sublime and unearthly, they use material ideas about the world, focusing on the most beautiful things they have ever seen. This is why the images of the gods are so different in different cultures, because each nation has its own idea of beauty. This limited form of expression often leads to many people missing the essence of what is being represented. So, unusual types of Buddhist images can alienate Westerners. However, if you tune into a calm and neutral mindset, you can see that the Tibetan style is surprisingly interesting and profound. It contains a huge number of details, complex ornamentation, and patterns that permeate the colourful canvases. Each deity, bodhisattva and Buddha corresponds to a certain set of attributes, so it's useful to know who is depicted in each picture. These attributes or spiritual symbols are also present in the images of the Vedic gods and indicate their specific qualities, activities and purpose. For example, Saraswati, the wife of the heavenly creator Brahma, is the wisdom-giving goddess of higher knowledge and arts, the creator of Sanskrit. Usually she is depicted sitting on a lotus flower or white swan, symbols of spiritual purity and perfection. In one hand, Saraswati holds the oldest Vedic text on earth, and in the other she holds beads that symbolize the sacred vibrations of the mantra that change space and time, creating harmony in the universe. And with the two other hands, she plays a musical instrument, a veena. Her four hands represent the mind, manas, intellect, buddhi, conditioned consciousness, chitta, and egoic self-awareness, ahamkara. The hands, representing manas and buddhi, together hold a sitar, which shows that it is necessary to align the mind and intellect in order to bring to the world high creative energy. Consciousness concentrates on the Vedic scriptures, meaning that the wisdom of our ancestors will lead us to the truth. And the ego restrains itself through beads, showing the need for practice and self-control. So every detail reveals new facets of this mystical culture. And it is important to note that Saraswati retains her Vedic attributes in the Buddhist tradition. which suggests a single source of these two worldviews. The same can be said about the goddess Tara, who is equally revered in Buddhism and the Vedic faith of the Slavic peoples, and is considered a special patroness of women. The goddess Tara is known in 21 different forms, but the most revered of these are the white form, granting longevity, and the green form, which protects from misfortunes and troubles. In Buddhist culture, it is customary to depict these forms of goddesses with white or green skin, but few people wonder about what determines the colours. One opinion is that, by using these colours, the artists reflect the glow of the chakras, the energy centres of the subtle body. So, green Tara translates into the world the energy of Anahata chakra, the energy of love, acceptance and sympathy, which is usually represented with a green hue. Manifesting herself in the world through the Anahata chakra, Tara sincerely and of free will comes to the aid of all living beings to bring them to spiritual growth. So, accompanied by the invisible gods and abandoning the severe austerities that almost led to his death, Siddhartha sat under a tree in the grove of Uruvela, having set himself only one goal: to gain enlightened consciousness. Immersing himself into meditation, calming thoughts and feelings, he again met Mara, the ruler of samsara, who personifies all attachments to the material world. In order to prevent the Buddha from carrying out his plan, Mara sent to him his marvellous daughters, intoxicating with their beauty. But Siddhartha had already gained control over all desires and did not succumb to the temptation. Then Mara called his army of demonic beings, trying to frighten Siddhartha and awaken the warrior inside him. But they did not achieve their aim either. The last temptation was a test of doubt. Mara tried to force the prince to doubt the knowledge he had gained. Then Siddhartha touched the earth with his right hand and called it to witness that he had attained enlightenment. And the earth trembled to confirm his words. From that moment on, the crown prince of the Shakya family was called the Buddha, the Awakened One. It is interesting that the episode of Mara's trials also appears in the description of the path of Jesus Christ, who, like real yogis, went to the desert to perform austerities and to know the nature of the true I. When hearing the name Mara, people usually imagine an eerie-looking creation of an awesome form and huge size, the Lord of Darkness. But it is important to understand that the real Mara is always that which prevents the achievement of complete liberation. At the moment, Mara is a good teacher for me. And, despite the fact that he is portrayed in a very scary form on the wheel of samsara, without his trials it would be extremely difficult to advance and learn lessons in this life. Therefore, currently I am trying to think about why certain events occur, why certain obstacles appear, or are manifested through someone. I try to take such problems as a gift of life, since in human life we can get awareness and achieve liberation, something for which our inner self strives. On the one hand, Mara is a teacher. On the other hand, he is a being that constantly tests us for strength and helps us by creating certain obstacles. I have my own image of Mara, and this image has numerous faces. He can be like a man who tempts you, asks you to do something, for example, like a friend who calls you out to a nightclub. Well, how come you're always at home? You're an unhappy person. Come with me and get some fresh air. It may even be a chocolate in the store. You pass by the store, you see this chocolate, and something unbearable happens to your head. Because this chocolate here, before your eyes, in your head, wherever you look, the chocolate is everywhere. And this is also Mara's face. So it is diverse. In principle, it can be thanked because it is a great teacher who tests us, shows us our weaknesses, and even helps us to become stronger. I have respect for Mara, because if he didn't exist, we would have completely relaxed. We would live too well. And this is a problem because if we take people who have everything they want, then they wouldn't have any wish to do the spiritual search. For them, unfortunately, spirituality issues do not arise. So I think that we need temptations and difficulties in life. As Padmasambhava once said, use difficulties as a path. And this is very important for me. The most important thing is that it helps to deal with these difficulties in a different way. You immediately think, so, something I have in my life is fine, probably something is not going right. When difficulties arise, it becomes worse in one way, but then, after a while with this awareness, it suddenly wakes you up and you think, today I became stronger. One must experience suffering in order to gain wisdom. Mara makes one commit to those actions that will lead a person to suffering. Therefore, you can think about him as either good or bad. But I think you need to be neutral, because this job, which is given to Mara, is necessary for this world. Many words that we use in yoga are very capacious. For example, the word suffering in the Russian language, stradanie. When you look at its root, Ra means light, Danya means giving, that is, the giving of light. Yes, it's not all sweetness and light, but whoever said that the path of development is only about pleasure? The path of development is testing, and Mara is the conductor of those tests, lessons that a person needs to move forward. I am convinced there are no accidents. In general, everything that happens, everything that develops is according to your karma. And this happens not because someone wants it to be so, but in an absolute sense, everything happens for the good. Remembering all the suffering, everything that happened in my family, at work, in my personal life, all this actually made me stronger. All that was previously shown to me as negative is actually a precious experience. As the Buddha is in us, so Mara is in us. These are generally two sides to our essence. Therefore, when we begin to go to the light and develop spiritually, we call it initiating our Buddha state. And naturally, we leave the state of Mara, who wants us to return to the old path. Our internal struggle with desires, ambitions, selfishness, and so on, this is a struggle with Mara. I do not perceive Mara as an external monster that comes and starts tempting you, and you can just close your eyes, hide, or run away from it. You cannot get away from it. It's simply inside you. Your inner strength comes when you can maintain the Buddha state in yourself and try to limit the state of Mara. This is the inner spiritual victory. In the Lotus Flower Sutra of the Wonderful Dharma, it says that on the way to attaining the Buddha state, the soul needs to go through several stages to acquire the experience of the god Brahma, the creator of the universe, the god Indra, the ruler of the gods, and the experience of the holy king rotating the wheel of Dharma, and the king of Maras. And only then the Bodhisattva, the soul striving for enlightenment, can approach complete liberation. A certain evolutionary ladder exists. I believe that after the King of Maras manifests himself in this world, then all Maras most likely become bodhisattvas. I quite often encounter parents who, in the early stages of their children's life, prevent their children from self-development. When the child first learns about yoga, when he begins to tell his parents, "Mum, Dad, there is yoga," they reply, "What is yoga? You go, work, live like everyone else. Enough of this nonsense." Very often, parents try to dissuade the children, but the parents are in fact acting like bodhisattvas. It's hard to believe, but it's true. Thus, they test their children's degree of awareness, how much they clearly understand. If it's truly important for you which path you follow from life to life, such tests only temper the person. The world opened before the Buddha. He saw it without the veil of deluded consciousness. He remembered his myriad past incarnations, saw the 6 levels of the circle of samsara, and all living creatures of the past, present and future. According to the scriptures, at the time of Buddha's enlightenment, all nature blossomed and the gods came to the tree of awakening, the Bodhi tree, under which the former prince sat down. The gods presented to him their gifts. Now, these offerings are known as the 8 symbols of Buddhism. Dharma chakra, or the wheel of teaching, is a symbol of transformation and spiritual change. The white shell is the sign of the propagation of the Buddha's teaching, which, by the power of its sound, awakens those who live in the sleep of ignorance. The jeweled parasol is a symbol of the protection of the mind from the scorching heat of defilements and a guard against suffering. The pair of goldfish is a sign of fearlessness and joy with which the fish swim in the ocean of samsara, independently choosing their direction of movement and not being afraid of possible obstructions. The treasure vase is the trove of all realization. It is a symbol of a long life, wealth and prosperity. The lotus flower is the embodiment of purity. After all, the lotus flower grows in muddy marsh water, but it is born clean and beautiful. The endless knot is the symbol of the depth of the Dharma, which shows the connection of all things and phenomena occurring in the world, as well as the unity of manifestations and emptiness. And the victory banner is the overcoming of obstacles, false views, desires and death. Upon attaining enlightenment, the Buddha gained many noble titles that elevated him above men and gods. The one that has come, Tathagata, worthy of offerings or worthy of worship, truly omniscient, perfect in illumination and conduct, well departed, understanding of the world, supreme, Anuttara, tamer of men, teacher of gods and men, the world-honoured enlightened one. Literally, the Tathagata is the one that has come, a synonym for the word Buddha, that is, the enlightened personality, with whom the perfect teaching comes to the earth. I read Urila's book, which describes the life of Baus Balayar, a Slavic king, and the most amazing thing is that I was in Bodh Gaya when I came to the page where it says that he was called Budai, and described the same story when he was sitting under a tree and, just as Mara was testing the Buddha, he also tested Baus Balayar. For me, it was such a huge revelation. Everything fell into place. The Buddha is not just some man who was born in India and walked around in a turban, but this is a person who has awakened and continues to awaken others. He smiled and looked up where a Bodhi tree leaf was clearly visible against the blue sky. He swayed forward and back as if calling Siddhartha. Carefully looking at the leaf, he clearly saw the presence of the sun and the stars. Without light or heat, the leaf could not exist. He also saw in the leaf the presence of clouds. Without them, there would be no rain, and without rain there would be also no leaf. He saw that the earth, time, space and mind, everything is present in the leaf. In fact, at this very moment, the entire universe exists in this leaf. Thich Nhat Hanh, from his book Peace is Every Step, The Path of Mindfulness in Everyday Life. In Vedic mythology, the sacred fig tree, otherwise known as the Bodhi tree, is the most frequent symbol of the Tree of Life, or the Tree of the Way. This is the place where all the preceding Buddhas reached the highest point of realization. It is believed that it is here that the future Buddha of Maitreya will attain enlightenment. Many disasters hit this sacred tree, but each time it received new life with the help of sprouts taken from it, and so it has been preserved to this day. While moving to Sri Lanka, Princess Sanghamitra, the daughter of Emperor Ashoka, took with her a sprout of the Bodhi tree, and it grew up. The tree still lives in Anuradhapura, and it is one of the oldest plants in the world, about 2,250 years old. And this despite the fact that usually the trees of this kind usually grow for only a few hundred years. Another direct descendant of the Tree of Enlightenment still grows today in the Mahabodhi temple complex in Bodh Gaya. Its age is already over 120 years. If you are practicing yoga or developing spiritual sensitivity, go to any big tree that lives on this planet for many years, talk to it, try to find a dialogue with it, and believe me, you will feel that it has a certain personality. It's not like people, they are different, but trees are really alive in fact. In yoga, there is an explanation of why trees are important as support on the way. A tree has certain laws that contradict primitive physics. Energy moves from the bottom up, which allows water to reach the furthest leaves. This movement of energy from the bottom up helps the yogis who sit under the tree. The vital energy of the person is also raised to the upper centers. Perhaps for some people who first encounter this, it will seem surprising, but try to understand the chakra system, that there are different chakras that cause different human behaviors. Depending on which chakra your energy is in, your behavior patterns will be specific to that chakra. That is why yogis try to raise their energy to the upper chakras to see reality as it really is. Now, Mahabodhi, the Temple of the Great Awakening, is the most famous Buddhist temple in the world. It was founded by the ruler of the Maurya Empire, the legendary Emperor Ashoka, 250 years after the Buddha's enlightenment. Ashoka went down in history as a ruler who patronized the teachings of the awakened, since whose time many historical monuments have been preserved because, at the initiative of the emperor, the places connected with the life of the Buddha were immortalized. In history, there were kings who, after heavy battles, swore no longer to fight, but Ashoka is the only one who made such a decision in the hour of victory, not defeat, and subsequently kept his vow. The Mahabodhi complex, as we know it, is a mandala in the traditional Indian style. The central stupa is a pyramidal tower with 4 smaller likenesses in the corners. The ancient part of the building is a square with a side of about 15 meters in length and a height of 52 meters. It is believed that in the very top of the building are stored relics of the world-honored one, a storehouse of yogic energy. In the main room of the stupa there is an altar. Here, the attention of the pilgrims is attracted by a golden statue adorned with precious stones. Its origin is not known. According to legend, one family, to save the statue, buried it on their land and kept it there for several hundred years. By practicing with the Bodhi tree, it is easier to achieve a state of deep peace and tranquility that must be cultivated in oneself on the spiritual path. Buddha said, "There is no happiness equal to serenity." Tranquility is when there are no internal tendencies, internal fluctuations or aspirations. When thoughts are calm, harmony and contentment are felt inside. Probably I would equate calmness with satisfaction. This is very important. The human being is predisposed to always strive for something else. Perhaps this is again conditioned by our unstable world. when we have everything that is necessary for life, it seems to us that everything is fine. But the most important thing, the real happiness, is always somewhere ahead, just out of reach, and we aspire to it with all our strength. Therefore, calmness is satisfaction with what we have now. In my opinion, one of the concepts of the Buddha's teachings is that we must consider the present and learn to live in the present and accept the present without thinking about the future or the past. In yogic techniques, by the way, we see the same thing. We try to work with the mind in the present. But an undisciplined person who has not controlled the mind and senses can neither have a transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind. For one who never unites the mind with the Supreme, there is no peace. And how can one who lacks peace be happy? Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 66. This quote from the ancient Vedic text Mahabharata is yet another confirmation of the connection between cultures. In this case, Krishna speaks of yoga as a creative way of life and thinking. One of the classical texts about yoga is, of course, the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which are an 8-step scheme for improving personal practice. His first 2 steps, yama and niyama, are ethical and moral prescriptions and, in many ways, converge with the teaching of the Buddha. In the yogic texts, we find the parallels that are given in the Buddha's teaching, that is, the principles of the yama and niyama, the principles of truthfulness, the principles of honouring the higher forces, the principles of purity and morality. This, of course, is very clearly traced in all texts, and not simply traced, but it is recommended for all yogis to begin with this. This is the foundation of yoga. This is a single system. Together they complement each other. But what is Patanjali talking about? That you need to strive to calm the mind and stop it wandering, to eliminate various emotions and take them under control. But what for? Of course, it is very difficult to learn this, but you can, and then what? And then the Buddha teaches what this is and how it can be used. For a yoga teacher, this is extremely important. Why am I talking about a yoga teacher? What does Buddhism have to do with yoga teachers? After all, most will say yoga is just putting your leg behind your head, right? Then these people need to study the works of Patanjali. If you study Patanjali's recommendations, you will understand that the asanas are a small step on the path of evolution that Patanjali made, classified and left for future generations. Moreover, there are many similarities between what Patanjali said and what the Buddha said. There are some people who say, no one knows who Patanjali was, and when he lived, maybe he was a Buddha. Naturally, he was not a Buddha. There is a description of how Patanjali was born, and he is a fairly well-known personality among a certain category of people. Many yogis who are engaged in Ashtanga and Vinyasa have Patanjali as their idol. I would recommend them to study the Buddha's teaching, as they will see that it is practically the same thing. Buddha reached the highest point of realization, but he did not immediately see his future path. In different sources we can find information that the gods asked him to stay on this planet and give knowledge to others. It was the middle of summer Buddha came to Satnath, which was known as the Deer Park. Right here, not far away from the holy town of Varanasi, he got his first students. Reading his first sermon, the Tathagata made the first turn of the Wheel of Dharma and gave the doctrine called Hinayana, or the Little Chariot. There is a preserved description that his students were not only humans. 2 deer came out of the forest and bowed before the Buddha and listened to his words. Since then, the Wheel of Dharma has often been depicted together with a couple of deer. Buddha explained to his listeners that anyone who wants to attain enlightenment must avoid 2 extremes: austerity and extravagance. If you intentionally inflict pain or harm to your body, you cannot attain enlightenment, nor is it possible to come to him living in luxury. So the Buddha introduced the concept of the middle way, saying, "This is way beyond the extremes, leading to mental peace and higher wisdom." Reflecting on one's life, everyone can agree that it has a volatility to it. Joy gives way to sadness, pleasure to pain, with the white stripe should be black, and vice versa. These changes are an integral part of our lives. All negative things may manifest on the path of living creatures, and this is called suffering. The deprivation, the vicissitudes of life make people feel negative emotions. To stop this from happening, Buddha formulated the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, which are the basis of the Hinayana. These truths are: 1. The truth of suffering, or dukkha; 2. The truth of the origin of suffering, samudaya; 3. The truth of the cessation of suffering, nirodha; and number 4. The truth of the path to the cessation of suffering, magga. The cause of all our worries are our numerous passionate desires and affections. Hence, to eradicate suffering, you need to find peace and independence from external factors. The way to end suffering includes the Noble Eightfold Path, leading to samadhi, nirvana, and non-duality. But it is impossible to describe these conditions in our material world, because nirvana entails the termination of everything we know in the world of samsara. Followers of the teaching called the Little Chariot are called Shravakas, those who listen to the voice, or Pratyeka Buddhas, or those striving for liberation only for themselves. With each passing month, the Buddha Shakyamuni's community, called the Sangha, grew more and more when, after meeting with the Tathagata, more people decided to become monks. Over time, many more Shakyas joined the Sangha, Buddha's brother by their father, Nanda, the cousins of Ananda and Aniruddha, as well as Buddha's son, Rahul. The Buddha's adoptive mother, Prajapati, and his ex-wife Yasodhara also wished to become nuns, and after a while, more women came to the community. However, the Buddha said that because of women joining the community, the teaching would remain unaltered not for 2,000 years, but only 1,000 years. Following the other Shakyas joining the community came Devadatta, another cousin of the Buddha. All his life he envied the success and grandeur of the heir to Kapilavastu and repeatedly tried to kill him, but the Buddha always remained unharmed. When the monastic community was formed, Devadatta decided to join it in order to split it from the inside. He achieved respect for himself and asked the Buddha, one of the large meetings, to make him the head of the Sangha. But since he did not possess the necessary abilities and moral qualities, the most noble one of the world refused him. Devadatta was enraged and vowed to take revenge on his cousin. When I read about him, it is very strange that someone does not like the Buddha. And he's always up to some kind of machination. A cowardly scoundrel, really. Then I had this idea. If there was no Devadatta, then Buddha would have no one to create the trouble that made him a lighter and more perfect person. Obstacles develop a person. Devadatta, of course, did not do very good things, for which he got a karmic reaction. But probably his role is also needed, and he was an example for others. Again, according to the same Jatakas, he was regularly sent to the lower worlds. This is when the earth opens up and he falls down for doing bad things and spends some time in the lower world to think about his misdeeds. The scriptures say that for his heavy sins, Devadatta at the end of his life was consumed by a flame from the hell of Nazibi, which escaped from a crack in the earth. According to the Jatakas, stories of the past incarnations of the Tathagata, Devadatta's hostile attitude toward the Buddha lasted many, many lives. It originated when they were born as two cranes with one common body. Trying to destroy the Buddha, Devadatta did not understand that he was hurting himself. Devadatta created problems for the Buddha in every carnation, always. He was killing him or caused other sorts of problems. But nevertheless, he's like an anti-hero who, no matter how many times he tries to do something terrible, it still ultimately brings good. Perhaps it's like yin and yang. They are always together, side by side, so the Buddha never reincarnates without Devadatta. Devadatta is always there and wants to manifest something that is necessary for the development of the Buddha and his disciples. Do you understand? It's very tragic. He always goes to hell. So Buddha goes to heaven, then into the world of people, then again to heaven, and again to the world of people. Devadatta has a diametrically opposite situation. Hell, the world of people, hell again, and again to the world of people. And he only meets with Buddha in the world of people. But apparently for Devadatta, it's also necessary. Therefore, one cannot say that this is extremely negative. In Eastern cultures, children get scared by Devadatta, but he was necessary because difficulties cannot appear any other way in the Buddha's life. No matter how much harm Devadatta does, no matter how terrible a person he is, I think he is the quintessence of all human evil. But nevertheless, the Buddha predicts that in the future, after many kalpa, the very word kalpa, I cannot even imagine such a number of years, even he will become a Buddha. He will have his own world, he will bring people knowledge. And that's great. It helps us to accept any person, no matter what he does. You can still see the Buddha in him. In the Vedic tradition, there is a way of developing the soul, or Jivatma, that true entity that we really are. Jivatma is able to change bodies for an unimaginable length of time. The Vedic tradition uses the concept of kalpa for the designation of large time intervals, the so-called day of Brahma, the period in which the life of the universe manifests itself. The kalpa lasts 4,320,000,000 years, after which the night of Brahma comes, marking the destruction of the universe. And from kalpa to kalpa, our true I gets new births and accumulates the experience it needs in different worlds. Finding the human body and striving for happiness, first the Jivatma must overcome the thirst for endless pleasure. And Shudras, the lowest caste, naturally chase only their lowest desires. Overcoming their insatiable desires and passions, a person ascends to the next step and tries to provide for himself and his family financially, to accumulate assets, realizing the ideals of the Vaishyu, i.e. artisans and businessmen. Passing this stage, the person realizes that it is necessary to protect the accumulated assets because well-being is impermanent, and he becomes a warrior, a Kshatriya. He finds injustice and fights for the ideals of a just worldly existence. But over time, the Kshatriya understands that you cannot fight endlessly. Then he realizes that people need to have spiritual values instead of material ones, so that they do not create those problems that will lead to suffering in the future. Rising to this stage of evolutionary development, a person becomes a Brahmana, a wise man or a seer, i.e. a spiritual master. Let's look at the category of seers. Some seers say, go to the right, there will be happiness. Others say, go left, there will be happiness. A certain classification of wise man, the Vedun in the Slavic tradition, or the Brahmanas. The Tathagata is the quintessence of this whole path. That is, he has gone through all possible variations of self-development and eventually came to the last stage, when he already knows all variations and cannot accumulate any more experience. The Tathagata, having lost all his karmic debts, must give way to the one who follows him. Continuing our journey and acquainting ourselves with the life of the Buddha, we necessarily visit the historical places that played an important role in the dissemination of his teaching. One such place is Nalanda. A famous Chinese scientist of the 6th century, Xuanzang was a follower of the teachings of the Buddha, and for 17 years travelled through India. His works contain descriptions of a large Buddhist university and a monastery complex in the north of the country. This largest educational centre of its time was called Nalanda. Xuanzang writes that, at the university, there were 10,000 students who were taught by about 1,000 outstanding teachers. There were 7 monasteries, 6 temples, and the height of some buildings reached 9 floors. The Nalanda library was called Dharma Gunj, or the Mount of Knowledge. According to Xuanzang, it contained over 9 million books. The books were by outstanding thinkers and yogis, guides of the Buddha's teachings, such as Shantideva, Atisha, Naropa, Nagarjuna, Shantarakshita. In 1193, this unique centre of ancient knowledge was destroyed by the Turkic invading army. Thousands of monks were killed and the rarest library was burned. Now there are only ruins. We always visit Nalanda when we have the opportunity, primarily to show people what spiritual development was like in the past. When people see the volume of the huge destruction, the remnants of which remain today, a large number of multi-story buildings with enormous foundations where only foundations remain, one can imagine how much space this monastery occupied, and how many people aspired to self-development. Now, our society is completely different, and people are trying not to think or talk about self-development, and in some cases they are forbidden to talk about it. There are still countries where self-development will actually be stopped, where other concepts are dominant. It's like a call from the past. In this place, people thought only of self-improvement. Who were the students of Nalanda? There were the yogis who have reached the greatest possible distance on the path of self-realization and who have become great mystics. Now, there is no information about what information the astrologers or mathematicians in Nalanda were studying, but there certainly were great yogis there. Studying the question of spreading the teachings of the Buddha, we note that in our country there were people who were imbued with trust and respect for his teaching. In 1847, the 19-year-old Count Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy became acquainted with a Buddhist monk, who was attacked by a robber who took away his belongings and injured him. In his story, Tolstoy was struck by the fact that the monk, following the principles of the teaching of the Buddha, did not offer any resistance to the robber, but remaining calm, closing his eyes and plunging into prayers, he was waiting for death, as if it were some kind of just retribution. From this Buddhist ascetic, Lev Nikolaevich first learned about the principles of the law of ahimsa, or non-violence. In his writings, he tried to reveal the true nature of man. It is well known that Tolstoy was interested in the Buddha Shakyamuni and his life, and he was also the author of translations of more than 100 Buddhist parables and tales. Under Tolstoy's leadership was written the first biography of Prince Siddhartha in the Russian language. More and more aware of enlightened qualities such as charity, love and compassion, and plunging himself into their essence, in 1885 the writer decided to switch to a vegetarian diet. Tolstoy repeatedly expressed the hope that in the near future, all people would become vegetarians, and that they would look at eating any kind of meat with the same disgust as they had for cannibalism. It is interesting that the influence of Buddhism on the work and outlook of an outstanding figure of Russian culture is a universally recognized fact, but at the same time very little known. Tolstoy was strongly influenced by the teaching of the Buddha. In fact, he became vegetarian when he understood the concept of the law of karma, where it is said that you are now hurting someone by filling your stomach with meat. It's absurd because there are so many other foods that can be eaten without causing suffering to others. Leo Tolstoy brought back to Russia what was once here. Why is Buddhism known in Buryatia? Buryatia is very far from India, and Buddhism is also practiced in Kalmykia as well. Well, in the scriptures, it is said that the Buddha and his disciples literally flew to distant lands. In the Tibetan city of Gyantse, there is a pagoda of 1,000 Buddhas, the Stupa Kumbum, which is part of the ancient temple complex. In the uppermost hall of this multi-tiered structure, there are statues of Buddha and his disciples. And it is important that these students belong to different nationalities. They have very different facial features as well as skin colour. But what does this mean? That the Buddha received disciples from different countries and the teaching of the Buddha was well known. There are German researchers who claim that even in Germany Buddhism was practiced, and across Europe the Buddha was also known. This great teaching, which at that time very strongly influenced reality, and naturally there were certain ascetics in Russia who tried to support this teaching in one way or another. Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy, as we know from his works, was very tightly connected to the teachings of the Buddha, because according to his description, he saw the essence in the teaching, something that every living creature should strive for. Those qualities that are described in the Buddhist scriptures, the qualities of compassion, mercy, all moral concepts, Lev Nikolaevich promoted to the masses. Let the following words be your talisman. He who harms others does evil to himself. He who helps others does good to himself. Cease to consider yourself a separate being, and you will enter the path of truth. For those whose vision is overshadowed by Maya's veil, the whole world seems cut into countless individuals, and such a person cannot understand the meaning of all-embracing love for all living things. From Leo Tolstoy's book, Karma. It is an all-embracing love for all living things that led the Buddha to turn the wheel of Dharma for the second time, 20 years after his first sermon in Sarnath. It happened near the city of Rajagriha, on top of the sacred mountain of Gridhrakuta. According to the surviving texts, this event was attended by a large community of monks numbering 1,250 people, as well as 32,000 bodhisattvas, creatures seeking enlightenment and helping others. If we talk about Mount Gridhrakuta, we know that people who have absolutely basic knowledge of meditation for some reason on this mountain feel a huge breakthrough. There is evidence that girls from Moscow came to this mountain, sat down in the cave, and went into meditation for 6 hours. They got such a breakthrough in self-knowledge that it is simply amazing. I know by my own practice that this place has a special energy incomparable to anything. Mount Gridhrakuta is also called the Mountain of the Sacred Eagle. Some say this place is connected with the events of the ancient epic Ramayana. After kidnapping Sita, the faithful wife of Prince Rama, the insidious master of the demons Ravana, carried her away on his flying chariot. Seeing this, the king of the winged tribe, Jatayu, the demigod in the form of an eagle, tried to protect the virtuous Sita, but was defeated by Ravana and fell to the ground, losing one wing. It is believed that Mount Gridhrakuta is the place this hero fell. Here, the Buddha gave his followers the doctrine of the Mahayana, or the Great Vehicle. The disciples who chose this path of development are called bodhisattvas. If, by adhering to Hinayana, the practitioner had enough to gain his own liberation, then the Mahayana path gives relentless help to surrounding beings in delivering them from suffering. For without the happiness of others, the personal happiness of the bodhisattva is impossible. It was such disciples who began to come to the Buddha, and he was pleased with the appearance of these people, for it was the motivation of the Bodhisattva that led the Prince Siddhartha to the path of liberation. But in order to develop a sense of compassion, one of the most important qualities of the Buddha, one must understand its difference from pity and sympathy. When we talk about Buddha's quality of compassion, perhaps a person who lives in society will confuse this with pity. In general, very often, pity and compassion can be perceived as synonymous. If you start to understand these terms, you can see the difference. Pity is when you sympathize with a person, but nevertheless you remain separated from them. You perceive, you understand, but you do not apply to yourself the difficulties that a person encounters. Compassion is something that is seriously discussed and cultivated in the Buddhist tradition. Very often one can hear about the Dalai Lama's understanding of this quality. But is it possible to develop this in our world? It is extremely difficult because of what is being cultivated now in society, which is probably the direct opposite of compassion. Compassion lies in the fact that when you see someone is suffering, you take this suffering, you are immersed in these feelings, and feel someone else's pain as your own. Unfortunately, at the moment it is mere words, which are loud, sublime and spiritual, but still just words. When a living being can fully develop this feeling of compassion, it is quite possible that it can approach the state of enlightenment and liberation. An important moment in the comprehension of the quality of compassion is that when taking someone else's pain on oneself, it is necessary to transform it so that painful thoughts and feelings do not take possession of the whole being. It is necessary to find the strength to bring light and joy to people, showing by example the inseparability from true happiness, in which there is no place for negative emotions. After all, as Shantideva said, "Whatever befalls me, let my joy be unchanged, for in sorrow I do not achieve what I desire, and my virtues will be exhausted. Why be sad if everything can be fixed? And why should I be sad if you cannot fix anything already?" I understood what a bodhisattva was for the first time in India. It is difficult to say that I learned rather than the feeling that I remembered it. You come back here and understand. Here it is most important. Here it is the essence of your life. Your essence has to do with doing something useful for others and not for yourself. If I previously thought I had suffering at work in the office, how can it be with Vedic life and this terrible work? How can they be reconciled and how can one live? After India, at last, my work sparkled with new colours. I realised that I am surrounded by an incredible number of people who have no idea what the yama niyama is, what it means to live for others. I'm not saying that they are bad people, because they cannot look at the situation from the outside. I now understand that I do not go there in vain, and I do not go there at all to make a budget or to find some kind of anti-crisis measure or what to do about the euro exchange rate. I do not go there for that at all. If I can help at least one person or two, it does not matter whether I only bring my knowledge or practice or energy, or calm down some of their passions for a while. Even then, I understand that it's worth it. Compassion is an understanding of the situation. Firstly, that this situation is real, and having the right attitude towards it, and most importantly, the desire and the opportunity to actively do something about it. I found this description in one of the books, and I think it's very important. Not just sympathy, but also assistance. Compassion is the driving force of the universe. This is what drives us to develop. The question is how it will happen. Will the world around us be the same? It depends on the personality, in what world he will be. What qualities a person shows in relation to the world will be his surrounding reality. Why is compassion the driving force of the universe? Because it is only through compassion that development takes place. It's much easier not to do something or not to break something than to do it. Therefore, compassion is the engine of development. Serious development will then take place in a man when he will put others above himself, when he will do everything for others. Different qualities come from different chakras, and so accordingly from low to high it will be if he does not get angry with others, if he accepts people as they are, if he will give, do alms, if he absolutely loves people, and if he is compassionate. All these enlightened qualities he possesses naturally are not the ego. This is patience, this is humility, acceptance, compassion, generosity. They all exist without I, without ego, when a person gives himself completely to others. Therefore, it is extremely important to gradually approach these qualities step by step and to lose yourself. Thus, the nature of a true bodhisattva can be expressed by 4 immeasurable qualities. 1. Immense love, that is, the desire to help all beings to find happiness and the causes of happiness. Number 2. Excessive joy, an endeavour to help all beings become inseparable from true happiness in which there is no suffering. Number 3. Immense equanimity, that is, an equal attitude without sympathy for one and dislike for others. Number 4. Excessive compassion, or a willingness to help all beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. One day, the Buddha was walking with his disciples, and a courtesan, a woman who provides services to men, met him. She fell in love with him at first sight, and he was a huge man who was very different from everyone else. And she ran up to him and said, "Oh my love, how long I've been waiting for you. Come to me, I'll treat you, I'll sing to you beautifully and dance." And the students were shocked when the Buddha answered her, "Oh darling, let's not do it now, let's check our feelings." And she seemed to understand. After some years, when the Buddha's students had already forgotten about it, while reading the scriptures, the Buddha suddenly stopped and said, "I need to go. A woman is calling me." They were surprised. Different translations say different things. In some translations, Buddha said, "My beloved one calls me," and everyone was shocked. But what is a beloved one? Buddha is trying to abstract himself from the sensual reality. Anyway, he went to the outskirts of the city, where under a tree sat the same woman, already sick with leprosy, and her body was falling apart. She had lost all her beauty and knew the opposite side of reality, and the Buddha said, "Well, my love, did you wait for me? Now I will help you." He called the healers. Among his students there were outstanding doctors, and they cured her in a short time. They restored this woman, and this woman, having received the knowledge of the Buddha, was able to develop to the point that she brought to the people something that no one else could bring. Symbols of 4 immeasurable qualities in Buddhism are the 4 arms of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion. Another necessary quality for the practice of Mahayana is wisdom. Its personification is the bodhisattva Manjushri, who cut off ignorance with his fiery sword and preserved the text of Prajnaparamitra Sutra, the doctrine of the highest wisdom. And this wisdom is not based on information, but on the awareness of the emptiness and transience of all phenomena. After all, if the nature of samsara is illusory, then so too is suffering. A bodhisattva is patient, soft, skillful in communication, not flashy, not ambitious. His thoughts are imperturbable. A bodhisattva is not close to the king of the country, princes, great ministers, or superiors. If people come to him, he preaches the Dharma to them in accordance with their abilities, not seeking to gain. From the Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wonderful Dharma. In Buddhist sutras and jatakas, there are examples of compassion and self-sacrifice that can hardly fit into the minds of modern people. This is the story of the Prince of Mahasattva, one of the past incarnations of the Buddha Shakyamuni. Passing along with two siblings through the forest, the young prince saw a dying tigress with two cubs that was so weak that she could not get food for her children. The prince told the brothers that he would catch up with them later, and then he went to the tigress and sacrificed his own body. After reading such lines, many people will become confused. What does this story teach? How correctly to perceive it? And is it an example of the act of a Mahasattva? Long before this prince reincarnated on this planet, he was the teacher of his disciples. His disciples sometimes had a tendency not to follow what their teachers said. If they did absurd things, they did not reincarnate in the best way. Therefore, this tigress had two tiger cubs who were actually Shariputra and Maudgalyalana, the best disciples of the Buddha Shakyamuni, who had reincarnated to the level of tigers. Buddha, in order to save his disciples from this fate, had to sacrifice himself so that their life in animal form would also be stopped. Why? Because according to certain laws of this world, if a predator kills a person, he is called a cannibal and exterminated. When this happened, the king learned that the prince was eaten. He came and killed all these tigers. The life of the cubs was interrupted, and they reincarnated there, where they should have been reincarnated. Therefore, naturally, without knowing all this, it is impossible to judge such things. As yogis say, if you want to understand the matter thoroughly, go into samadhi and see how it really is. All speculation from the mind can be anything. Similar examples of sacrifice are also found in the biography of the guru of Tibetan Buddhism, Padmasambhava, and his wives Princess Mandarava and Eshe Tsogyal. With an enlightened consciousness and a vision of karmic causes, Padmasambhava knew what lessons were needed for his devoted companions. He saw in them more than just a tender female being. He made them fearless guides of the Dharma, and often gave them much harder tests than women can usually take on. It seems to me that there is nothing wrong in sacrificing oneself for the sake of other people. It is not necessary to literally take the call to sacrifice oneself for others, so do not go looking for hungry dogs to eat you. As Padmasambhava advised Mandarava, go to the cemetery and feed the hungry dogs. You will correct your karma and help them. It is impossible for a modern person to understand this, no matter how hard they try, unfortunately or fortunately. This is the flow of time. Times pass, the foundations change, as do the rules of morality. We have always had self-sacrifice in our culture. Take the proverbs, die yourself and help your comrade, or a friend is known in trouble. Such things have always been understood. The fact that they are now forgotten is the problem of the modern world. Sacrifice, self-sacrifice and compassion make the world a better, cleaner place. This should be just a normal life motto aimed to improve your life. You can donate not only something material, but you can also give your time and attention so that you can try to help people in some way. It seems to me that if a person has adequate karma, that even when he has read such extreme stories of when a person sacrifices himself to a yaksha, allow the yaksha to eat him, and by doing so protect weaker people. In the Jatakas there is such a description of when the Buddha in past lives did this with his body, or when they cut off their body parts, or even insert lamps into their bodies, all for the sake of teaching. On the one hand, it is an allegory, and on the other it is to illustrate how much a person is willing to give something valuable for the sake of the quintessence of knowledge. Yes, these stories exist, but if we compare them with other stories of the teachings that the Buddha left, these type of extreme stories only account for about 10% of the Buddha's teachings. It turns out that in certain cases, it is as necessary to someone as medicine, but this does not mean that everyone should be doing it. In the third part of the film, we will continue on our journey through the life of the Buddha Shakyamuni. We will visit the city of Vaishali, where the teacher of gods and men turned the wheel of Dharma for the third time. We will see the ancient center of yogic culture, Varanasi, and learn what the Buddha preached at the end of his earthly path and why he left our world. and the participants in our trip will tell you about the discoveries they made on this life-changing journey. If you can, please join us.